Okay, so this is going to be a video on identifying and discerning our social relationships in order to have greater joy. And this is a video that is near and dear to my heart because it is something that the Lord has taught me through recent experiences, and it is important that these ideas get shared and disseminated to others. So, the purpose of this presentation is ultimately how to find joy and avoid suffering. And that really is the purpose of life, is to have joy and avoid unnecessary suffering, should I say. I said suffering, but I should say unnecessary suffering, because suffering is baked into existence. So joy comes from valuing what God values, and we come to learn what is valuable by doing our best. In one way that we can optimize our ability to find what is valuable is through the relationships we have. So one of the key ideas in this video is that our joy is tied to our social relationships. But before we get to that point, I want to discuss something that is really important when it comes to our progression with God. So here's a figure with different arrows, and this idea is not mine. It's from someone else, but he conveyed it in such a profound way, and it contains profound truth, that I included it here. And I think it's fitting. So we have different options each and every day in our life on how we want to ascend towards God. And these arrows here represent the choices. And the middle arrow is the best choice, and that will quicken our ascension to God, our progression towards God, because by doing the best, we are doing what God would do in our circumstance, and therefore becoming more like Him and moving forward. But there are also good choices, or I guess better than good choices, that we can do, and that's represented by these orange arrows. And then there are the worst choice and bad choices. And we don't have to get necessarily into the terminology, but the key is that you have the best choice, and then you have sub best choices, so choices below the best. Anything below this line, you are regressing. Anything above, you are ascending, but it depends on how quickly you ascend. And so our goal is to always be doing the best, because then we will be ascending the quickest. So we optimize our progression by choosing the best, and relationships and the type of relationships we form and have aid in this optimization. So relationships are important because they facilitate joy through growth by encouragement, correction, and teaching. So while we are in social relationships, the purpose of social relationships in the gospel context is to have an avenue or an environment of growth and progression. That is ultimately the purpose of families, and a righteous family can facilitate a righteous father or parents can facilitate greater godliness in their children than unrighteous parents. And that's why the family is an important thing, an institution, because if done correctly, it is one of the best ways to optimize growth in children and in learnees so that they can grow and improve. And so relationships are like this as well. And if relationships lack these properties, the person's ability to receive joy is limited because they're not given the proper estimation of value. They're not informed and instructed on what matters or how to achieve things that matter and what that looks like. So another thing to keep in mind is that not all relationships are equal. Not all relationships carry the same value, and some are downright harmful. Obviously, the best example or obvious example is an abusive relationship between a husband and wife. If the husband's abusive towards his wife, that is a harmful relationship and um, needs to be avoided. And the person needs to leave that relationship. So we can see, and we see also in other examples of friends, if friends, and I'm using this term loosely right now, I'm going to later use this term again in a more um, intentional and strict way, but just for example's sake, we can see how with groups of friends, if those friends aren't trustworthy or loyal, they can cause much harm, more harm than good, by way of gossip or betrayal or any other way, or maybe just even the influence, right? If you're around friends that don't value the same things you do, you engage in wicked behaviors, that will influence what you decide to do and can have a lasting impact. So, understanding this truth about relationships will do two things. It gives you the potential to maximize your joy, and it will prevent tons of unnecessary suffering. The key thing is that we want to find people who are more like God than we are in order to optimize our ability to make the best decisions, which thereby increase joy. Joy comes from doing our best, because by doing our best, we are able to identify what remains. We're able to identify whether what we did is actually reaping the fruits that we desire or not. And it's only by doing your best. For example, if you want to see how well a garden grows, the best way to know is to do your best, because then you can see what's lacking and then make corrections. And if you don't do your best, well, it could be the reason why your garden's not growing is not because you don't have the right seeds or are watering enough, it's that you're just being lazy. And so the best shows you what else remains, right? If you do your best, you take every care you can of the garden, and it still is not doing well, then you have a sense of what is going wrong, and that is outside of your hands, and you can then make the correction. And so this is the same thing with relationships. So there are types of relationships, and not all relationships are equal. So let's go give an example. Not every person in Jesus' circle had the same status. We know from the scriptures that there were 3 apostles, then there were the 12, there were the disciples of the 70, and the people. And the 3 apostles had a closer relationship with Jesus and proximity to Jesus at certain times than the others, even the other members of the 12. We can do this with King David. King David had Jonathan, who was Saul's son, and they were very close. There were also the mighty men, and then there were the people of Israel. And all of those had a different relationship status with King David. Moses is another one. Joshua was, you could say, second command, and then you had Aaron and Miriam. You had the elders of Israel and the people of Israel. And each of those categories had a different relationship with Moses. So, for us, it's important to understand that our relationships have a hierarchy attached to them. And now we have what I have broken down into the 3 different hierarchies. And I don't mean to say that this is the way it has to be. This is just the way I've understood it. And this is based on scriptures and experience. And these terms are not necessarily set in stone, per se. I think friends is actually a pretty scriptural based term. But then you have associates, acquaintances. Those are my own terminology to describe categories that fall below friends. Okay, so now let's talk about what each of these mean. So what is a friend? Well, one of the best examples is to read scriptures. And this comes from John 15, verse 7. And the Lord speaking to the disciples says, "If ye abide," and that is, be friends with Christ, "in me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. So shall ye be my disciples. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I will call you not servants, for a servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you." So we get a little glimpse into what it means to be a friend in the scriptures. A friend gives himself to the benefit of the other. Friendship is a relationship of growth and improvement. Friendships involve teaching and instruction, correction and improvement. And friendships are reliable, dependable, and trustworthy. And those are the things that Christ laid down when he described. Talk about a man laying down his life for his friends. It's giving a benefit. My friends, if you do whatever I command you, that's instruction. Called you my friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father made unto you. Reliable. And that also goes back to instruction. So the friendship relationship is going to be different than how we colloquially will define that term. Because in the gospel, there's always a hierarchy of people, and no one is on the same level. Everyone is at a different level, and it depends. Someone might be higher than another, some might be lower than another. It just depends where we all fit. But in a friendship, much of the value in a friendship relationship is that there will be one who has more light and truth than you have. And maybe it could be in certain areas where you might have it more in one area, and then someone might have more in another area. But in any case, there's always going to be, whatever the scenario or the situation is going to be truth being conveyed from one person to another. And in the friendship, you can see, because the person has the truth, they're able to convey that to the person below. That gives the opportunity for the person to grow and improve, advance and progress. All those kind of terms. And so a friendship, well, let's see if there's anything else. So a friend relationship leverages and optimizes this hierarchical differences for improvement. And so another thing about friendship, as I'm looking through my notes, is that the key is not to get so hung up on the hierarchy. The hierarchy is just a natural byproduct of spiritual caliber of all of us. But the key is in this relationship is this commitment to truth. That as long as you're willing to receive what the person is willing to teach, you are setting yourself up to be advanced along in your purposes and ultimately finding the most value that you can given your present desires and current limitations. So some of the characteristics of friendship are intimacy. And I don't necessarily mean romantic, but I mean closeness, connection, willing to move deeper into someone's relationship. The more they reveal themselves, the more you receive it. And even though it might be uncomfortable, it may be harsh or difficult, you take it in, you receive it, and you give them a chance to teach and help you grow. It's also characterized by depth, love, honesty, reliability, and so forth. And so this is, by using these traits, I'm trying to convey an idea of friendship that is deeper than just what we think friends mean. And it's someone, it really can be characterized by depth of relationship, depth of intimacy, of understanding. It's really characterized by depth. So it's not just someone you know, someone you hang out with. It's someone that is helping you to achieve your purposes. And that comes through a deeper connection. And we can see that with Christ, that he would sometimes chastise his apostles, but he was also so willing to teach whatever they were willing to receive to help them in their desire to enter the kingdom of heaven, and also to be servants of God and to facilitate them in performing miracles and in preaching the word, so to speak. So, what we then need to do then, when it comes to finding our friends, because as you saw earlier, the friendship category is at the top, and there isn't a lot of room for us to be friends with everyone in this level of intimacy and degree. And so, what this means is that we will have to unfriend certain people. But by unfriend, I don't mean this kind of unfriending where we have nothing to do with them, right? We're bitter, whatever. It's more of this way. If I have to hide who I truly am in order for you to like me, then why would I want to be friends with you? And that's kind of the idea. And we'll get to more of how we can discern between friends and who are our friends or not. But the ultimate idea is that if someone isn't going to, if you have to hide who you are, if you have to be dishonest, then they're probably not someone you really want to be around with, because they're not letting you be who you are. And I want to be very careful, because I'm not saying that this means that our friends have to accept our flaws and everything. But what I'm saying is that when you express yourself honestly and the person rejects you, then maybe they're not someone you should be associating with. Versus if you express yourself honestly and that person then receives you and seeks to improve and help you, then that is someone that's worth your time. Because ultimately, this life is just a temporary glimpse, blip in our existence. And what we want to ensure is that we want to make sure that we've utilized our time wisely, and that comes a lot through the relationships we have. So now let's move on to associates. So associate is basically anyone that's not a friend, but it's more who we have an occasional or even a consistent relationships, but it's never developed into something deeper, and that's because there is an unwillingness to be completely honest, and the person is not willing to fully receive who we are. And so what this means then is that this category is very broad, and it can include people at church, work, neighborhood, and family. And so it's important to realize that your family, despite you being raised by your family and you know your family, could be in the associate category if there is lacking intimacy or a deeper relationship between you two or your family members. And so the key point is the lack of depth. Friendship is characterized by depth, by correction, by honesty, and anything outside of that is now connected with something lower than a friendship, which can be associates, or the next one, which is acquaintances. But before we get there, here we go back to this diagram. You can see now that in the associate category, the level of truth that's able to be conveyed is not as strong as in the friend category, because there is maybe level of distrust or lack of intimacy, and therefore unwillingness to fully receive what the person has to share. Nevertheless, it's still something that we can utilize, and it's not something that we completely shy away from. We just have to realize that there's going to be a limitation. And the other thing now is when it comes to the friends, before friend category, we might be the person below, and our friend might be the one above, sharing light and truth, and we're receiving what we can. But in an associate category, and it also could be that we're the ones up top, we're conveying more light and truth to the person below. But it could be either or. That's the point. But often in associate category, you're going to be the one at the top sharing more, well, the light you have to the ones below, because the person's not fully willing to receive you at a friend level. And so you're going to have this kind of muted or limited relationship in terms of the light and truth that you're able to share. And so it's kind of characterized by inconsistency, shallowness, maybe not reliable. We'll talk more about that. Potential for greater intimacy, but not there yet, due to the inability for both to be honest with each other. And then acquaintance is kind of a catch-all, which is someone who's not a friend or associate. And one of the things about acquaintances are these are those who may be recipients of palliative care. And that's not my term, but it's a helpful one, because with acquaintances, these will be people that will refuse growth. And in that case, you are to, given your circumstances and what works, you are to provide what will make them the happiest. Now, not everyone who's acquaintance is a recipient of palliative care, but those who receive palliative care are in the acquaintance category. You're not going to give palliative care to associate or a friend, but acquaintance, that's where that comes in. And then your job is just to give them the most joy that they are willing to receive, because they don't want to receive something higher. So to kind of wrap this up, our job in life is to go about and assign category to the people in our lives. And as you can see, we're going to have very few friends, given the level of intimacy and the time we have to spend, and we're going to have more acquaintances. And these can move around for sure, and maybe friends might bounce. Maybe you might think someone's a friend, and life reveals otherwise, and you move it around. But the idea is to ensure and do your best to discern and categorize the people in your lives so that you're maximizing your time to achieve the greatest joy that you can achieve. And so friends are those who are willing to embrace intimacy, growth, and correction. We need to move away from the colloquial definition of friends. And friends can actually be people who are not in our family. They can be people that we have met through other ways, who God has led us to. It doesn't have to be necessarily, intimacy doesn't have to necessarily be family or familial type intimacy. It's really the idea of receiving one another and coming to a deep relationship through receiving who that person is and receiving correction, and then maybe providing correction as well. And so then there is this reciprocal growth going on. So getting to this point now of how do we identify then? How do we go about knowing which category the person belongs to? And there are two ways. And there may be more, but these are two solid ways to keep in mind. Is honesty and trials. So one way to quickly know if someone is your friend or not is to be honest with them. Be honest about your beliefs, be honest who you are, and see how they respond. See if they continue to associate with you, or if you start to see them wither away. That's a sign then that they're probably not a friend. Because a friend who desires for your best, who desires to help you, is going to appreciate the honesty, because they see you as authentic and they see you as someone who is open. As long as you're honest and humble, you're open to receiving further correction. And so a friend will recognize that. And then the other one is your trials. And this is just a good way is life experiences, and see who comes in, who doesn't, who's reliable. When you're suffering, who comes to your aid and who doesn't. And that's a really good way of knowing whether someone's a friend or not. And this can be sometimes painful, because sometimes you might think that you have more friends than you do, and then life experiences will say otherwise when you have a trial and you're suffering and you need their help, and they're nowhere to be found. Then you can say, well, not a friend, maybe you're more of an associate, or maybe an acquaintance. And you have to learn to just accept that. And if they want to improve that relationship, then you can wait and see. But you at least now know where the person belongs to, and then you can go find out friends. And so then you can avoid wasting time, and you can find people who are actually reliable. So in your life, you should be actively assessing your social relationships to identify where each person belongs. And by doing this, and it's going to be an iterative process. You're not going to necessarily get it correct in one go. It may take some trials or experiences to know. You can certainly avoid the suffering from trials by just simply being honest and seeing how people respond. And if they still remain your friend or they're still close, then they may be more committed to your well-being because they're willing to deal with your honesty. And so that is a way to figure it out. And so in wrapping up, it's important to realize these things. These are something I have learned the past few years. And I have learned it maybe the more difficult way through trials. And I'm starting to do more of this and being honest so I can start sifting through things quicker before I have to have the hardship of a trial to reveal who is a friend and who is not. But in any case, this is something that if you apply, can significantly, well, if you apply, you will have a higher potential for receiving joy. You'll optimize your ability to receive joy, put it that way. And you can avoid unnecessary suffering.